Hey, family, this is me. But just in case you don't know who me is, I'm John Seldis, and I'd like to welcome you again to another episode, another opportunity to join in conversations. I call them relevant conversations with yours truly, John Seldis. And one of the things I just revel in, and I think it's the cat's meow, that I get the opportunity to talk to people from around the country and sometimes around the world, and folk who are actually some of my friends, some of my family, some of my partners in the ministry, some of my partners in the work of doing justice and faith work. And I get to do it with some of the most brightest, smartest, um, full of personality, sometimes very, very silly and foolish. Amen. Praise the Lord. And so here we are again. And I had this remarkable opportunity tonight to introduce three of my road dogs. Can I say it like that? And y'all don't be mad at me. I don't mean, I mean that with all deep heartfulness. These individuals who I'm about to bring to this platform are some of the brightest, brilliant, smart, and we get to do work together in a number of different ways and capacities. I've known for these folk for a very long time. One of these people, I knew them before they knew me. And I got to watch them from a distance for a really long time. They used to live in Chicago. Anyway, and for a really long time before we got to work close with one another. Let me begin with my friend who I was just remarking to them. They got degrees and went to school at the Notre Dame, the University of the Notre Dame, and so you something in particular, and if you were ever to be around her, you would notice that she's, so maybe she played basketball. Maybe she was a All-American and all of that kind of stuff you talk about. And then she went on from there and went to the Maxwell School, got a degree at both a master's and then got the PhD from Syracuse University, and now is a professor and do all kind of manner of teaching and carrying on at the let me get it right, at the Claremont colleges. And I was on the website at the Claremont College, and I had altogether forgot how many schools that are all up in that conglomerate. You can get any kind of degree you want and study in all manner of things. I appreciate very much her brilliance. And she does a number of things in the community and all over this country, traveling and doing the stuff that she does. And I'm glad to call her my friend and colleague. Let me bring to this platform Dr. Dionne Bensonsmith. Come on in the room and say hello. Hello.
Hi. Am I allowed to say hello since you outed me as part of the Notre Dame women's basketball contingent?
Yeah, and especially since I live in Connecticut, there's some kind of a rivalry that I won't go too deep in until we get in the season. We'll go deep later with the UConn women. Amen. I'm so very, very pleased to know you, and for these last several years, worked very close with you. Let me introduce to you another of my buds, my heart. I gotta go to Seattle, Washington, but that's where they live and do the work now. But they really an East Coast young person. Well, they're not so young no more, but amen. I'm not gonna out them. They're looking at me crazy. I can already tell. I'm not looking at you at all. I'm just gonna introduce you. Clearly, there are a lot of accolades I can attribute to this next guest, one of which I'll start here. He's my friend and brother. Got degrees most recently got a master's degree and a doctorate from Seattle University, and has served as the director of their doctoral program, and asked me to come teach for the little school while it was operating. And I had a good old time doing several of the things that I have to offer, and now is in the provost office. Am I getting this right, or that's the last job? You'll tell the people. You tell the people all about all these different jobs you have had. What I can tell you is he's a scholar, has written and published. I can't even count the books on two hands, and has really been somebody that has operated for me as a thought partner in life and in the work. My friend and brother, let me introduce to you and bring him back to this program. He's been on with us before. The Reverend Dr. Edward Donalson III. Come on and greet the folk, brother.
Good evening. It's wonderful to be back with you again.
Oh, he can be so polite. I'm not gonna let you be that polite. I promise you, I'm not gonna do it. Last, but certainly not least, probably is probably the most famous of us on this here thing tonight. Is this dear beloved colleague and friend who hails from Chicago. She roots for the Bulls like I do. I don't know if she really care about the basketball so much, but if she did, she would root for the Bulls. And right now, I can't ask her about the baseball because I don't even know where she would land with the baseball team. But for sure, she would root for the Bulls. She has been a well-known activist in the Chicagoland area. That's how I got to know who she was. She was sitting at the helm of several of one big organization that was doing a lot of work, justice work in and around Chicago. And then we bumped into each other again in the work in the early 2000s. I guess it was the early 2000s in Washington, D.C. And then she joined the team that I was on the board of and led us in some several different directions. And we've been in close relationship both in life and in the work. She is now a professor at let me get the name of the school right, because I tear this school's name all the way up. The Methodist Theological School of Ohio. Did I get that right? And I think I did. And she teaches ethics, which I find very, very interesting, knowing some of her trajectory, both in ministry and in religious thought and thinking, but also as she is helping to develop scholars who think about ethics in a particular kind of way. She now is also the executive director for the Interfaith Voices for Reproductive Justice. I have to name that because she is one of the founding mothers of the movement, the folk who gave us the term reproductive justice. And so that's why I say she's kind of the most famous of us. And back in the day, they published a full-page ad that actually set the world on fire as it relates to reproductive justice and the work that Black women are leading in this conversation. Let me bring to this platform Dr. Toni Bond. Come on and join this august body and say hello to the peoples. Now you got to turn your mic on, otherwise we ain't gonna hear you. Is it me? We can't hear you. It's muted now. Lord, she done broke the thing. Still can't hear you.
How about now?
We can hear you now.
All right. Sorry about that. I said thank you for having me on the show, Bishop.
You also are not a newbie. You've been with us before, so I appreciate you. You did come on. We had a nice conversation right after the gala.
We did. We had a really good conversation. You got the name of the school kind of sort of right.
I messes it up all the time.
So you said it's Methodist Theological School in Ohio, not
of.
Not
I see.
right, not of Ohio. It's in Ohio. Yes,
that's right.
Yes,
the Methodist Theological School in
Ohio. And yes, I am a Bulls fan. No, you cannot ask me about baseball because I don't really watch it. However, now I am watching football. Go Bears. But I like the Eagles.
Okay, you can have them Eagles. Yeah, listen. Yeah, Dr. Donalson don't know nothing about no football. He know he's supposed because he's from Philly. He's supposed to cheer for the, but he don't know nothing about no. Yeah, no. I likes all of the football teams that have black quarterbacks. I'm gonna just let y'all in on this little secret. When they got the black quarterback, because I remember time wasn't no black quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And now the black quarterbacks are the way most offenses are run. Now I don't watch the football too much now because I did support Kaepernick, and I still all bets are off though when they get to the playoffs, and everything. Then I start come on back to it, and then by the time the Super Bowl rolled around, I guess I'm gonna watch Bad Bunny on the halftime show. Anyway, that's a conversation of a different.
We're all gonna watch Bad Bunny on the halftime show. But let me just say, I did watch the game yesterday. That was a good game.
All right. Well, we gonna offline. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that. I didn't know you were such the football fan. Well, we can chop it up a little bit about football. Listen, the reason I wanted to have some conversation with you three in particular, we are engaged in some work together, and we can put that to the side and maybe hit on a little bit of that near the end of our conversation. I'd like to begin the topic of conversation for me on this platform over the last several weeks has been these moral times, the way in which we are being thrusted into both conversations and our situations and circumstances that have some. Let me just speak for me. I'm scratching my head as to how in the world did we get here. Now, of course, there's some rational thinking around maybe how we've gotten here, and I'm not, I've had my own various and sorted opinions about such. But when we think for a moment, and we're engaged, Dr. Donalson and I in particular, as we lead in faith community context, but also all four of us are engaged in wider conversations that have both political and religious beginnings, musings, ideas, the way in which Dr. Bensonsmith, I was a religion major and a poli-sci minor as an undergraduate. And of course, you know that there is a very distinct through line that goes with that reason and thought. I'd like to begin our conversation about, at least as brief as you possibly can, an analysis of where we are in this current moment. Where are we? And let me be geographically specific. In the United States, but when I say that, all of a sudden, when I say United States, that's only for the moment, because anything that happens here also has some global impact, right? So I understand that, and I get that. Where are we? Can I get the preacher to talk first?
Sure, I'm happy to say. Where are we? We are the 68th empire out of 70 empires in the course of human existence. We are seeing now what happens to every empire. Empires rise and empires collapse. We're seeing the collapse of an empire. And what we're seeing is the manifestation of an immoral imagination that began as the democratic experiment called the United States of America. Everything happens twice. It first happens in mind, and then it happens in time. And so the framers of this democratic experience, from the perversion of their mind of white supremacy, created a society where certain groups would be centered and other groups would be marginalized. It's from the very founding imagination of this nation forward. And even when amendments were made to these founding documents that were meant to be equitable and toward justice, they always left themselves breadcrumbs that would lead them back to a supremacist narrative. So what we're seeing is the full maturation of what has been the wicked imagination of those who saw themselves as having a divine mandate to do something that would be a city set on a hill in their language. And I think that's really where we are. We're at the conclusion of a moral crisis that has been the through line of what it has meant to be a part of the American empire.
Exactly.
Dr. Bensonsmith, what would you say?
I can't say that any better. I would just add to it that, this is the end stage. For years, folks in public policy, at least in my end in public policy, have been using the term end stage capitalism. And so what we are seeing in the United States had its fruition and started with the colonial experiment, with colonialism. And so this kind of demarcation of who's in, who's out, who gets to be just human, comes with colonialism and the spread of empire, particularly the French, the British, somewhat the Germans, but mostly French, Dutch, and the spread of empire to demarcate. These are who gets to be human at this very essence of who gets to not only belong in the democratic experience, but who gets to be treated humanely, who gets to be part of the institution and institution building, and who gets a say. And so with this culmination of what we're seeing in the United States, it is also happening globally, right? So the global turn and this turn to fascism and the turn to push out in parts of Eastern Europe, parts of Western Europe, colonial satellites, folks who have been pushed out and been outside of the home and country as they reemerge and they merge in with the UK and France. You see this rise in fascism, white nationalism worldwide.
Thank you. Dr. Bond, you're an ethicist amongst us. So here Dr. Donalson and Dr. Bensonsmith have lifted up the fact that we're in this, quote, democratic experiment. And I'd say that loosely because in my mind, we've never been democratic. It's always been about a certain group of people who had lots of money. So democratic in democracy, not so much. But there are some high ideals that I think some of the framers were at least trying to get at. Using your ethical lens or your ethic lenses, could you dig into that a little bit? I'm sure I'm serving you up a softball, but what would you say to us in this context?
Thank you, Bishop. I feel like Reverend Dr. Donalson and Dr. Bensonsmith said it so eloquently. What I would add is we have to keep in mind this concept that we know of called democracy came about from the ancient Greeks in about 508 BCE. And that's not before Christ, that's before the Common Era. And and so in fact, the framers of the founding documents of this country that we are in, the United States, took that concept and took those ideals and came up with their concept of what a democratic nation state would look like. But that democratic nation state never included Black, Indigenous people of color, because we were never believed to be human. Mm-hmm. It didn't include Native and Indigenous people either, right? And so, and I would add the tools by which they used to mitigate when there were problems with this concept of democracy that they created, like the courts and the legislative systems, were never tools meant to be used by us. We have just been able to utilize them to right some injustices. But we have to keep in mind that, in fact, democracy is working the way it was always intended to work. It was never intended to protect us. And I'm reminded of Audre Lorde saying, we cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. That's what we've been doing all this time. And anytime I've talked about democracy, I've put it in quotes, because democracy has never benefited Black, Indigenous people of color. I am reminded of, I don't know if you all remember this scene in The Color Purple. There's an unforgettable moment when Celie looks Mr. in the eye and gives him the three fingers and says, till you do right by me, everything about you is going to crumble. And that line is more than a personal declaration. It's a prophecy for this nation, because until this country does right by Black women, until it does right by Black women's bodies, our children, our families, and our communities, the concept this country calls democracy itself will crumble. And that is why I say we have to interrogate this country's notion of democracy, because when authoritarianism is taking control in information, one of the first places it seeks to attack is reproductive and sexual health rights and justice. And we know that the reproductive and sexual oppression experienced in this country has fallen the heaviest on Black women. And so we also know that when Black women are harmed, entire communities are destabilized. The warning Celie gave Mr. is a warning for America that until you do right by Black women, nothing built on oppression will stand. And so this concept of democracy is shaky at best. And as Dr. Bensonsmith said, across this nation and indeed across the globe, authoritarianism is taking control. But let us be clear that these authoritarian movements that are rising are propelled by white Christian nationalism, patriarchal violence, and a politics of exclusion. And that these actors are truly hell-bent on taking us back to a time when women and Black people and Latinx people and Native and Indigenous people, LGBTQ plus communities, immigrants, and the poor had little to no voice in shaping the policies that govern us. We are in a moment where Black people are being called to use our imagination to reimagine the future we want to see. And we're also at a time where it is critical for us to think about the interdependence of our lives, this network of mutuality that Dr. King talked about, that we all share, that we are coming upon times when they say, check on your people. Yeah, really check on your people. Make sure people have something to eat. make sure people have a roof over their head, make sure people have the medicines that they need to have, right? Because we know with the cuts to Medicaid, a lot of people are going to lose their health care. And so it calls upon us to create those mutual aid networks, if you will. And the last thing that I'll say, this is really a time for us to look back, understanding Sankofa principles, that we have to look back in order to understand the way forward. We have to draw upon the wisdom of our elders and our ancestors who led the way in the civil rights movement, the environmental justice movement. We have to draw upon the ways of our ancestors across everything from spirituality to economics, all of these areas. And Black women will play a pivotal role in the way forward. Black women have always been the moral conscience of this country. And Black women will, I predict, be the population that will help to figure out where we need to go. And I don't know that we need to go back to democracy as it was conceptualized. We need something different.
Whoo. Now, you all have set the stage, right? And you made me think about Dr. Bond. You made me think about Octavia Butler. All right, and her books, Parable of the Talents and Parable of the Sword, those two books in particular, and then some of the other Kendrick and some of the other writings, all point to and begin a discussion that I'm not hearing more folk talk about: Afrofuturism, right? The concept of Afrofuturism. So I'm going to pause right there because I want to come back to that. I also want to say something about mutual aid. I have begun to talk about that term is such a loaded, squiggly term, at least here in the Northeast. Let me just speak about it in the context of the Northeast. Because, of course, there once again, race raises its ugly head and begins to set demarcations of who is valued, even in this mutually aided project, in a way that's deeply and heavily problematic for me. So I have begun to talk about what we do in community, and I love the term "who's your people." Check on your people. Who your people is, and I'm using that in a very specific dialect and a very specific understanding of how, at least where I'm from, and my people from Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana, talked about it in some particular kinds of ways. It is of extreme value for me to think about that from its very beginning. This country never included Black people as human in the get-go. Now, of course, that's messed up in that they was having babies and using us as product and cachet and knew we were human in one way, but then didn't value us as human in other ways, right? So that's somewhat of a misnomer, but it is the truth that by law, we were 3/5 human, right? For purposes of voting and money making, right? It is strange to me, strange fruit, to think about it, to think about what you all have just said, and to engage or encounter folk we know and love who are surprised at what you've just outlined and just have said. They're surprised by the forces that have gathered themselves in such a way, and it's as if this is something new when it's not new, right? Historically and otherwise. Dr. Bensonsmith, we were in a conversation not long ago about some of these concepts. Could you talk a little bit about I'm thinking about it in a kind of geopolitical context then. How do we get here from where, right? There is a trajectory, and don't go too far back. Let's just stay here. Let's stay here with the American Revolution era and come this way. How did we get here?
Well, I mean, I think to address a couple of things, and I do want to go back to the pin that you put in about mutual aid for a second, because I just want to let me add a little bit of a post-it note on your pin that mutual aid and collective work and co-op work has been part of the Black experience long before we were even quote unquote freed. And so we have been operating in a collective for a better part of our time. Even before we got to the continent, we have operated in a collective. And there are plenty of examples of that. And I just put my own family started one of the first Black co-ops in the United States. So mutual aid takes a lot of points of view. And I think if you use that through line of what we're talking about with mutual aid, how we got here, we can never, ever forget in the United States that this was, and I always go back to colonialism, it's part of a colonial experiment, but it's also a part of this experiment of grand expansion and land grabs that are happening with the European satellites. And so with those land grabs and this kind of movement towards freedom, quote unquote, freedom in the United States with the founders in 1776, this was about property, money, and who gets to lay claim and who gets to keep profit, right? And so in that like imagination, life, liberty, and the pursuit of property was the original text in the Declaration of Independence. Benjamin Franklin said it just didn't sound good because it sounds a little bit too raw. And so we want to have the pursuit of happiness. But the pursuit of happiness was always about the pursuit of profit and the pursuit of this individuated property. So I'm not going to go too far into the philosophy of this, but this separation, this bifurcation, right, of mind, body, and spirit that allows for capitalism and this individuated way of moving. So capitalism, colonialism, and particularly the American founding documents really inhabit and say that the individual is supreme. The individual is supreme over the community. It is my individual right to compete and grab as much as I need. And if I have this sort of embedded philosophy, right, there has to be a winner, there has to be a loser, there has to be people who are inside, and there has to be people who are outside of this. And so it is driven, I'm not trying to sound like I'm a rampant Marxist when I say this, but it is driven by this need for a competition, individual competition, individuated supremacy. And the people who founded the documents, as we said in this conversation, were largely white men, well, all white men, who had various forms of Christianity. They didn't even like Catholics. And I think it's also really important to point out that the founders were very, very paranoid about papists. They were very, very, this is what they called them, papists, very paranoid about people who were Jewish. They were paranoid about anything that was outside of what they thought of Christianity. And that comes from a very particular break that happens not too far behind when we have the founder in the church between Protestantism and Catholicism. And I know you didn't want me to go that far back, but let me just say that in order to break all of this connection between spirit, between individual, I think, therefore I am, is what Descartes said. And this is the first separation between the body and the spirit. And so you have to have this philosophy and also then the institutional arrangements that put everything into, again, this individuated, mind-centered, and say that other people, Black people, women, are embodied, and that those people are less than, they're less rational. So the rank order isn't just about human, right? who's less than and who's not. But the rank order becomes who are the best humans, who are a little bit less, and then those who are just considered not to be at all human, right? And that goes along not only racial lines, it goes along religious lines, and it also went along lines of what they considered to be ability, who is dependent and who is independent. So all of these things are intersecting in the founding philosophy, and it intersects in a way that then imbues whiteness, maleness, and a form of Christianity, a Protestantism, as the best and highest level of not only intellectual thought, but competition and physicality, that then they say this is the Republic, right?
So, Reverend Dr. Donalson, this idea of the individual in the center of what Dr. Bensonsmith just lifted up runs for me. I don't know how this hits you, and so that's why I want to ask. This hits me it gets me sideways when I think about the religious connotations of our spiritual development, right? The individual and the group, the ecclesia, right? The church is the assembly of the folk, not the building, but the peoples. And so for me, there is this koinonia, community. The essence is not the individual alone, right? That we come together. I'm gonna stop because I can preach my own sermon right there. I could go right there. I'd love to hear how that hit you.
Well, it's interesting because around the same time Dr. Bensonsmith is pointing out, you have the signing of the doctrine of discovery by the Catholic Church and by the Pope. This was not just some accidental or incidental sideways kind of outlying theology. No, this is part and parcel of what it meant to be the church. And that doctrine of discovery said you had the right as a white Christian to take property from other peoples, to seize that property, and to permanently and perpetually enslave other people groups. Now, you take that doctrine of discovery on the Catholic side and marry it with Protestantism's Calvinism, which says you are totally depraved and simultaneously the very elect of God, which will now justify any and all dehumanization that you are able to inflict on others. And you'll find out why religion has always been central to the experiment of human hierarchy, right? So even the idea that the Pope could be the vicar of Christ, the very representative of Christ on earth, or Christ vicariously, meant that any land that was considered a savage land or heathen land, which can be red, black, and brown spaces, are subject and subjugated to the idea of this white God man, right? And so for me, it hits at the core of what it means to pervert the gospel. And if you really want to know how we get to a perversion of the gospel called white Christian nationalism, or white, as Cornel West would say, white Christo nationalism, because it has nothing to do with being Christian. If you want to know how we got there, it's because we have trafficked in a perverted version of Christianity for centuries, right? Which has always allowed for this hierarchy of human existence, a hierarchy even of humans over the rest of nature, etc., for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is the current manifestation of a break in our humanity, right? And that manifestation of a broken humanity is what oligarchs and technocrats are now looking to, an intergalactic oligarchy rooted in genetics and eugenics to be quite specific. But it's a long tradition of brokenness that we've never reconciled in America. The Black church has been the place that has demanded that we move closer and closer to the truth of what Christianity has been. But by and large and writ large, the civic religion of America has been a perverted Christianity that has led to the manifestations that we see now.
Boy, Dr. Bond, I'm throwing it to you again.
Well,
Yeah.
I would concur with Reverend Dr. Donalson. We need only look at how enslaved Black women were abused and vilified and really just considered property, right? Property to be used to fulfill this country's economic need for human labor to work the plantations. So this brokenness that Reverend Dr. Donalson talked about, that this country has, this country has always been broken. There's something about this country's moral compass that has never been right. Mm-hmm. And we can go back to the founding fathers and the fact that they owned slaves. So how do you create this document, this Declaration of Independence that talks about all men created equal and everybody deserves freedom and liberty, yet you own human beings? You own human beings who have been forced, first of all, who were taken from their homelands and brought here and forced to work your plantation fields, who you did not recognize as human. But I think there are some important lessons, and yes, we need to spend as much time as possible talking about that history. But there are some resources available to us that we need to begin to start to look back at. I am really looking at the work of Octavia Butler again. And you mentioned, and I think of Octavia Butler as one of our griots, right? Because in Parable of the Sower, the main character who created this new religion called Earthseed said, all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. And we, I believe, are being called in this moment to use our creative Afrofuturistic reimagining capabilities to come up with something that will radically change the lives of Black people so that we can flourish and live the lives that we were intended to live. Octavia Butler was prophetic. She prophesied this moment. When you look at Parable of the Talents, she talks about the presidential candidate running on a platform of making America great again. This is what we need to begin to study and to figure out, how do we create a pathway forward so that Black people are safe, Black people have our humanity recognized, Black people can flourish.
Can I lift up I'm sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
Lift up Octavia Butler, and one of my other favorites is her Dawn series, in which the spawning of humanity comes from a Black woman. And one of the things that she points out in that, and I think it echoes what Bishop Donalson was saying, is about hierarchy. And so one of these things in terms of figuring out how we work, or not only just work around, but deplete hierarchy, right? Hierarchy, non-hierarchical, empathetic, and compassionate leadership that comes from, in her book, it's coming from a Black woman, and empathy being at the heart of how we build systems, which is very different than the current systems that we are seeing crumbling, which are not built in order to. I'm an institutionalist in political science by training, so I believe how we build and what we do, we can build systems, we can build practices that allow us to actually lean into the better parts of our nature, the better parts of humanity. We are a collective species. By and large, we didn't make it all the way here being rampant individual species, hierarchical species, and we can build systems that actually allow us to lean into that and allow that to flourish. Or we can continue with the type of system that we have, which is one that really imbues scarcity, it imbues hierarchy, it imbues competition. So you just mentioned Octavia Butler, and I wanted to lift up Dawn.
Can I lift up? We're talking about Afrofuturism, but for the sake of clarity, for those that may struggle with the language, when we're talking about Afrofuturism, whether it be Octavia Butler or other Afrofuturists, we're talking about an intersection of imagination, technology, futurism, and liberation, right? We're talking about an artistic aesthetic and a framework for critical theory. I mean, of course, we know it's coined in 94 by Mark DeRay to describe new ways that Black college students and artists were analyzing art and sociology through technological and cultural lenses. And I think it's important that we lift up its original definition in a time where words are being co-opted, and words are being made salacious and scandalous. And so even the term woke right now is problematic. And so the next move after critical race theory is to then demonize Afrofuturism. But the reality is it has a definition, it has a meaning, and it is a discipline. And the more we understand that, the more we are empowered to lean into the tools of Afrofuturism as Black scholars, Black thinkers. And I also want to lift this up. When Black scholars and Black thinkers lean into Afrofuturism, it lifts the whole. It is not segregation. It is not isolationism. It actually raises the bar and the standard for what it means to be fully human. Because when we say Black people, we're talking about the least of these. We're talking about what Howard Thurman would term those who find themselves with their backs perpetually against the wall. So we're talking about lifting all, but we're doing it through a lens that is specific to some very important cultural demarcations.
So
Reverend
for
Dr.
me,
Donalson,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I am so glad that you provided that fuller definition of Afrofuturism. And I'm so glad that you brought in how our words, our language that came from the Black community is being vilified and demonized, especially the term woke. That history of the term woke goes back to 1938 in Leadbelly and his warning to the Scottsboro boys to be safe. It has always meant be safe. Be clear about your surroundings. And of course, how it then was used again in the 2000s, but it meant liberation. It meant this. It also had elements of Ubuntu philosophy to it as well, that I am because you are because I am. Stay woke, be safe. I'm thinking about you. Call me when you get home. Let me know that you're okay. Stay woke. I'm going to be awake until you call me and let me know you're okay. And I have been waiting for someone to take that word back. It's refreshing that we're having this conversation now, because even in some of our spaces where we have our seasoned political commentators who are talking about current events and how they too embrace this language. They embrace the language of otherness. They say illegal aliens. Well, people aren't illegal and people aren't aliens. And it is incumbent upon us. That is a part of the work we have to do. We have to correct the misnomers when they are put out there.
Yeah, yeah. So we got just a few more minutes to be in this conversation. A couple of things that just surfaced for me that just bubbles up out of my spirit. This idea of liberation. And when I think about liberation, I go to Haiti, 1791. Mm-hmm. And I go to Cecile Fatima and Duty Boukman, who were the spiritual leaders of the revolution that ultimately culminated in 1804 when Haiti declared themselves not anymore Saint-Domingue, on the island of Hispaniola, but Haiti. All right. And what happened in the conjuring, in the spiritual work that began toward liberation. All right. I think what we're talking about in Afrofuturism is just as much, not only, now I'm going to start preaching. I know it. I feel it coming on me. And it's okay because I am one. What happens when you start to look back and have this Sankofa moment, right? Which we are always doing. We're always saying, yeah, but back when there was another time when we were faced with something similar, and we have these stories, all right, from Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home, and the work of our freedom fighters coming through the enslavement period. But I want to go back to this moment, 1791, when they on the island on that island began to pray, sing, dance, and call on the ancestors, the spiritual world. And let me get this correct. The spiritual practice of the ancestors and the Orishas, in a Judeo-Christian context, y'all say Jehovah Jireh, which is a particular name of God or an aspect of God. It's not different gods. It's one God with many different parts. I am Black and a man and an educator and a daddy and a son and a brother. I'm all of those. And at any given time, I can be leaning toward one or the other. It gets me all tore up when I hear people start to do something else with that. But it was at that point, historically, that they named the beginning of the liberation happened at prayer meeting. All right. Now, for me, liberation starts there. We take prophetess, for example. We get prophetess Octavia Butler in here. We bring her in. The very beginning of their work in this prophetic moment, right, is when they started to realize we have something that's within and without that then creates for us community, whereby we then help one another, that we live for one another, and that the most powerful that they were ever in with each other individually was together, where there were different tasks and different ways of gathering themselves and being together. We got a few minutes. It seemed like to me we need to be leaning there.
I'm here for the song and the work for the song and the music and the dancing and the conjuring.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about, Dr. Bond and Bishop Selders, is spiritual technologies. And our dear friend, I know that she's a friend of all of ours. Now I said our dear friend and can't call her name. In Atlanta, they're on faculty at MTSO. Help me, Dr. Bond.
Dr. Lisa
Allen.
Yes, has a wonderful book
indeed.
I had that just came out but she talks in that work about multiple different spiritual technologies. And I think that as a people, a collective, Black people, there it is over my head, Dr. Lisa Allen. We have to get back to the technologies that have worked for us. That's a part of our Sankofa moment, whether it be prayer or singing or dancing or conjuring or hush harbors, because I think that this new wave of internet access or whatever has made us lose some of our ability to exercise discretion. And so now we put everything is an email list, and everything and we have to have some strategies and some technologies where we learn how to work our codes, and how to maneuver in discretion, and possess the sovereign grace of brevity. Everything doesn't need to be over explained. Everything doesn't need to be over articulated. So sometimes we do ourselves a disservice because in our quest to be articulate, we've told too much. We've spoken too much. And I think you're tapping into the real heartbeat of where we are and the work that we need to do in accessing these multiple technologies that are available to us.
Yes. So Dr. Lisa was on with me the other day, a few weeks ago. So her book is right at hand, right here. And what we talked about this very thing. I call it the three fingers Miss Seeley, right? All right. That was spiritual technology at its best, where she was calling on what she already knew, and then speaking a word that had prophecy on it, but I would also say it had spiritual power. She was summoning all of that into the moment, and I think here we are in this moment. And you remember this song, Reverend Dr. Donalson. If we ever needed the Lord,
we sure
do need him now, right now, right? And so this move toward, and we are all thinkers and scholars and activists, and we're doing our stuff, right? We working our work, and yet if there is no power in it, it all goes to sweet and sounding brass and tinkling cymbals. In my opinion, this is just one Black man's opinion. I think it is when we are accessing the power that is resident in us, when we are in community, when we come together in those conjuring moments, it is at that point we can speak a prophetic word that then resounds, right? That actually is where freedom and liberty actually exists, so that we have no need to depend on the government, because they come and go. This one, if you think it's going to be revived, you're wrong. I'm just saying to you that so much change has happened now. There's no recovering what has existed. We now have to think about how do we develop something new. And that's what you're naming, Dr. Bond, in that we've got to figure out where do we go from here. We are already at time, but is anybody got a burning word to say to help us? Obviously, y'all got to come back. We got to put a part 2 and then maybe a part 3 on this. But Dr. Bensonsmith, you got something on this?
Well, you were talking about at the turn of this is the engage in freedom dreaming, and what Robin D.G. Kelly calls freedom dreaming. It is to build and create new visions and create where we go. And that is what historically our art has done. That is historically what our song has done. That is historically what our prayer has done. My grandmothers prayed over me, but they prayed over me not just for where I was, because I was a very sickly child, but they often prayed for where I will be. And they named it and they claimed it for me, that this is where I want this child to be in health, to walk fully, to breathe air, to run to her fullest ability. And that's what you're talking about, not just naming and claiming what is happening and describing what's happening in the moment, but we need our art, we need our leaders, we need our prayers, we need our parents, we need, especially for our young folk, to give the opportunity, the liberatory opportunity to sit and lay claim to where we will be. Don't give purchase, is what my grandmother would say, of your future over to white folk. Your future is for you to claim and for you to decide.
So they say she ain't no preacher. I don't know. I don't know. That sounds like good preaching to me. I gotta call it. We gotta close this out. Listen, there's gonna be a part 2, part 3, and maybe even a part 4. I see it coming prophetically. So stay tuned. Listen, I thank you all 3 of you, for being so kind to me and thinking it not just, a shame that y'all would, at a drop of a hat, come and share in this moment. We've just begun to drop some bread seeds in this moment, the breadcrumbs along the way. And I think we have more to say and more to do and more to talk about as we help each other work out our liberation with fear and trembling, as the book might say in the King James Version. Thank you all for being with us. And listen, we're gonna be back at this thing, same bat channel. I'm of a certain generation, same bat time. But we're going to continue having these kinds of conversations. I think they're relative. I think they're right now words for our living, and our living healthy, more free, more free, and doing it within the context of helping not just ourselves and our own, but all of humanity. All right. See y'all later. Peace.
Bye. Thank you.